3 people more on the waiting?
They are joined.
Okay, great. So we can start. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and our apologies for the slight delay. We had a small technical error that we had to sort it out with our resource person. So welcome once again to all our new and returning participants to the third webinar of the series. On behalf of the Ministry of Skills Development, Employment, and Labour Relations, together with the Tertiary and Vocational Education Commission of Sri Lanka, I would like to welcome you all to the third webinar in celebration of World Youth Skills Day for the year 2020. So the objective of these webinars is to create a regional dialogue about skills in demand and to drive youth towards a promising employment and entrepreneurship career path, and to listen to the pioneers in their respective domains, to learn from them, and to see how best we can craft the future with the lessons that we have learned in the past. With this, I would like to warmly welcome Ms. Simrin Singh to commence the session on Be the First, Youth Job Opportunities After the COVID-19 Pandemic. Ms. Simrin Singh is the Director of International Labour Organization, which we all popularly know as the ILO Country Office for Sri Lanka and the Maldives. And she, of course, has decades of experience in labor and employment related matters. With this, I would like to formally welcome Ms. Simrin Singh, and you can start your presentation now, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Sharada, and thanks for inviting the ILO Country Office and myself to speak on this important day, World Youth Skills Day, the World Youth Skills Day. And so I'm very happy that the ILO is taking part in this, and that you have such a good number of participants also joining from lots of different sectors. So I'm supposed to talk to you a bit about youth and job opportunities after COVID pandemic, and I guess that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Where will the jobs be? Because we've seen such a major and massive transformation in the world of work as a result of COVID. It's been unlike the kind of rebuilding even after many world wars that we've had to experience. For those of you that might not know, the ILO is a 101 years old organization. We were actually born right after World War I as a solution, and in many ways to ending, creating justice, creating peace, but also creating jobs. So here, once again, 101 years after our birth, we have another form of a crisis, which feels kind of like a war, but might not be. As such, it's where everyone is each other's enemy here in this crisis. And so what will the world of work look like, and where can the jobs be created? And especially, how can youth themselves focus their training for the kinds of jobs of today and tomorrow in a world that has been devastated by this pandemic, and it probably isn't the first and the last. So let me just maybe give you a quick snapshot. The first slide. I'm gonna, is my screen shared? I think it is. I will.
It is shared, but we're in the first slide.
Yeah, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So let's just take a snapshot of where Sri Lanka stood actually when it came to youth and people in the labor market pre-COVID. And you basically have a situation where things weren't that bright even before COVID, sadly. We had, based on the labor force survey here, of 2018, we already had something like over 21% of youth unemployment rate in Sri Lanka. And that is quite high because globally it's 13%. So you already had a problem, kind of, so to speak, a significant one beforehand. And then added to that, those that were, not only unemployed, but they were not in education, they were not in training, they weren't working. That's even higher, almost 22%. So it was not a great situation. And these were things that I think the country was already grappling with, is like, what is the need and where will the jobs be, and why are youth not moving into the right kind of jobs or where the economy would thrive right after education or whatever else they would be doing. So basically, you had that situation, and then came along COVID. And as we know, it's really created a significant amount of suffering and not just, the physical side of it, but there's been a huge psychosocial side of things. We've had to basically, I mean, many would say a reset button has been set. We've had to rethink the way in which we work, rethink the way in which we interact. So the psychosocial side of things, you know, if you were thinking you're going to office, you're no longer going to office. Things have really changed, and you can't socialize, etc. And the ILO looked at the world, and you know, we basically, the latest estimates are something like more than 300 million jobs have been lost, and many affected, particularly our young people. And that's because young people are in precarious work, or work that is not, isn't already established in many ways. So they're already entering in a bad situation. And you had, obviously, the whole provision of training and education was also thrown upside down, you know, with 50% of learners saying that they're having delays in finishing the courses that they were assigned to, and 10% saying they doubted whether they'll even be able to complete the courses they were already enrolled in. So it's really had quite a devastating impact on the whole education and training methods and that people were and youth were put in. And as many as 1 in 6 are no longer in employment, which is huge. Like I was saying, these are global figures, but I think very much the Sri Lanka, since it was already bad and worse than the global average, you can only imagine what the situation is right now. We don't have the data, so to speak, right now on exact figures, but if global figures are to say, and what the past was, we really have a pretty serious situation in terms of young job seekers that are not getting the jobs, and those that were in jobs that are out of jobs at this point. And basically what the ILO has coined as a term is that there's a real fear that unless some serious measures are taken and preparation is done, we could be looking at a youth lockdown generation. And I don't think, you know, those of us that were part of generation X, Y, and Z don't want to be now called a lockdown generation, because that really is going to be very bad economically and socially also. Now, one of the approaches that the ILO had been following already just pre-COVID, and this is building on our 100 years of experience, is, you know, we had a country program that really emphasized creating jobs and prioritized youth and the kind of jobs we thought they would have. We had already started to look what the future of work would look like, and one of where the kind of jobs would be, and including especially for youth, young women and men. And also this concept of lifelong learning. So it's not just that, you know, you finish school and then you enroll in a vocational course and then you're done and you have a job for life and the same thing. We already had started to see that, you know, people were changing professions as much as 7 times in their career lifetime, and it was accelerating much faster. So the idea of constant and continuous learning, lifelong learning, was something that, you know, was an ILO approach already pre-COVID. And focusing on leaving no one behind, which meant that those, recognizing that there were some particularly marginalized groups, women in particular, you have a pretty low labor force participation here in Sri Lanka of women, those with disabilities, whether you're from certain minority groups, etc. So they were particularly hard hit. And then already what has been coined was like, how can we build back better? You know, what kind of skilling and upskilling might be needed now that COVID has come going forward to embrace a new world of work or renew the world of work. Now, so before COVID, and the reason why I'm taking you back to just before COVID is that I want to emphasize that this is not something that we're thinking of immediately, like, okay, COVID has happened and now all of a sudden we have to look for absolutely new job opportunities. There were already a lot of attempts made and thinking ahead of how the world was going to change, whether it was COVID or something else. We already knew technology was really at the forefront. We already knew that psychosocial and life skills were extremely important in embracing what the new world of work would look like. And that has basically come true now, because we saw all of a sudden overnight, you know, online education happening. We saw overnight even care and you couldn't go to a hospital, so you had doctors and nurses advising you online or via other means. You couldn't shop and get your food, so all of a sudden the platform economy was kicking in, and you had people delivery services created and e-commerce began. So technology was really already something we had predicted, and basically what happened with COVID is that it's gone fast forward, and that seems even more now where the jobs of the future and the present will be. So one of the things, I mean, certainly the future of work was looking at this, but also it reminded us that while we can get all excited about technology and wonderful things they can do, it can also lead to having people that are left behind, and it could lead to forgetting that they're human beings out there, and there are human needs also out there when it comes to the world of work. So it's not just about computers and technology and robots, but it's actually a future of work must be human-centered and really look at the needs of people in society. So here in Sri Lanka, already about in March last year, and we looked quite a bit more into it throughout this period, we had predicted that the kind of jobs and where youth should be focusing, particularly, were in three what we called bright spots. And those are basically in the tourism sector, which now we know has been so hard hit by COVID, in the green, what we call the green economy, and in the care economy, because Sri Lanka is a rapidly aging population. Now, what I want to say here, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this because the topic is really what are the job opportunities. I think, and we think here in the ILO very much that these three sectors remain, and if not even more relevant with COVID going forward than they were a year ago when we predicted that this is where the jobs will be. The tourism sector we looked at, yes, not the kind of tourism that has been developed 20, 30 years ago, not the five-star hotel tourism, but the kind of tourism that shows Sri Lanka as a very special tourist destination, so a higher end tourism, a more eco-friendly tourism, a tourism that's much more on cultural tourism, homestays, and tourism that actually takes advantage of the digital platforms to be able to get customers to regularize, to regulate the industry. Regulation in tourism is very important. It wasn't existing before. And there were very, very few women working in tourism sector here, actually in Sri Lanka, lower than the rest of the world, frankly. I think like 11% female participation in tourism, which compared to Thailand and other places and Philippines, it's 60 to 70% female participation. So you really had some issues already in tourism. But if you actually embrace tourism through taking advantage of these digital platforms, you can create jobs in a multitude of things that are much more culturally and societally appropriate for men and women and others that might not be, having to service five-star hotel type of things going forward, to taking advantage of the beautiful biodiversity assets that Sri Lanka is one of the few countries in the world that still has. So that form of tourism, and so this can create a number of different jobs, whether you're a wildlife expert or a biodiversity expert, to link those skills with jobs. You can have platforms, whether you want to operate Airbnbs or catering services, whether you want to do tour operations, whatever it might be, there's a lot of jobs that can be created in the tourism sector, and it needs to be revamped as such. The green economy is another one because, like I just said, Sri Lanka is one of the very few places on earth now remaining that actually have amazing biodiversity hotspots. And there's a lot of potential given the fact that it also is a very, each year you're having droughts and floods, right? So the climate element of risks in Sri Lanka remain extremely high. And with COVID and climate, I think right after COVID happened, we had a period where we were terrified of the floods coming because the monsoons, I mean, the rains were coming in. Everyone was bracing for what are we going to do if we got a double whammy. So because of these issues of the climate related side of things and Sri Lanka's vulnerability, but also its assets, we thought that a number of jobs could be created that were related to the green economy, including things such as, medicine. Ayurvedic medicine is extremely, medicinal plants and things like that that are grown here. If one can become a technician or learn how to not become a old school chemistry engineer, but one that can work on some of these other things that are more green, so to speak, it would create a number of new jobs. I'm just trying to think of different innovations that can be done there. And of course, using, again, technology to avoid the carbon footprint and things like that would be where the jobs would be created going forward. And finally, the care economy. Now, this has become extremely relevant as well. I had said initially Sri Lanka is an aging population, so you really needed people to take care. This is, people from like domestic work, those frontline, hospital care, physiotherapy, child care. The issues were so many women were out of the labor force and young people because they needed to take care of the children or their elderly parents. So there was such potential, and there continues to be, for the care economy. And now you see it front and center, because with COVID, all of a sudden, it was the very care side of things that needed a huge influx. And fortunately, Sri Lanka had the medical care in fairly good shape, but the volume could, if it does go exponential, this is something that will be needed more and more going forward. And how do you provide those care services, whether it's in the case of a pandemic or not, going forward? So I think those are the areas where, when looking at jobs going forward in Sri Lanka, post-COVID or even during COVID, these have been the areas, and especially the care economy is extremely important for generating the kinds of jobs and for youth to be focusing in terms of building their skills. And it goes without saying, technology-driven, none of these is done without some sort of a technological angle. So you have to have skills that are technologically, you have to be technologically savvy, and then with it, because technology is moving real fast, and it can be such an asset in trying to market the skills or to learn new skills and be able to reskill or upskill and then start jobs and market the products. And if you're an entrepreneur today, the kind of your success as an entrepreneur will probably be much higher if you have the digital skills and you embrace some of the opportunities that the platform economy or these platforms provide for you to be able to succeed in your business and have it say and to market things. So, the other thing also is that we've seen, and talking about, the whole idea of a 9-to-5 office job with the same transportation services going and things that have been thrown upside down. And I think already certain companies and areas of work, especially IT, for example, and even to some degree things like banking and stuff, none of that stuff really requires a 9-to-5 show up in the office with a briefcase type of scenario anymore. Frankly, even government, Sri Lanka's had a huge number of people working in the public sector, 20% if I'm not mistaken. And that's where a lot of the training has been for young people. They want a job with the government right after they graduate. But even the government service actually was thrown upside down and had to employ things like flexible working hours, teleworking arrangements. And it's really created a different, and those that were able to adapt to that were able to actually service the population, the public, the way they were supposed to. It took several weeks to set up the IT infrastructure here, but I think going forward, that's something that's going to be there to stay. And you already saw a number of these social enterprises and different types of entrepreneurship things that were happening with these arrangements of flexible working hours and out of homes as opposed to office settings, therefore reducing costs, operating costs, et cetera, also of renting an office and things of that nature for young people. So getting into the labor market, if you can enjoy and you find, if you're digitally savvy and technologically savvy, and you have a good ideas linked to the tourism, green, or care sectors, your ability to enter the labor market is that much easier now in a way, because of the idea that you no longer have to be working for someone. You no longer have to necessarily be going to an office setting all the time. There's a lot more flexibility for you. And then so your upfront costs of starting a job are lower, including also your upfront costs perhaps for getting the training, because of all the opportunities of online training, which is a fraction of the cost, if any. There's so many free trainings provided, etc., and you can be connected to any part of the world at this point to get that training, international training even. So there's a lot of lower costs upfront and ease of access if you have technology infrastructure in place, including for women that have traditionally not been getting in. Another area that has been working, and I'm very happy that this morning actually I was in the presence of Honorable Prime Minister and the Minister of Labour and Skills Development, Employment, and TVEC. Something we've been working on very closely is called a skills passport also. So already this is something that basically certifies the kind of skill set you have, and it's like a very cool digital card where it gives information about where you are, what skill set you have, and it can be updated constantly in a database and can be used as a certification that, for any employment, you can go anywhere in the world, or, you return back as a migrant worker and you get a skills passport, then you can show that as certification to get jobs here locally. So I think this is something that will really also help, and it's a digitally manned. It can be used for young people as they get the jobs, and to know that they can use this tool also, that they don't get boxed into one profession. They can use this to also be certified and seek jobs going forward. Now, what we have done post-COVID here in Sri Lanka what we analyzed was, Sri Lanka is a huge informal sector, meaning a lot of the people working are not, again, in these 9-to-5 regular employment relationship jobs. Many are under the radar, are not registered, they're not part of a social security scheme, etc. And they're mostly, the hardest hit are what we call micro, small enterprises, basically those that have less than 50 employees. And a large majority of them are actually those that have less than 10 employees. And many of these small micro enterprises are run by young people, or they're these startups that want to start up, these young entrepreneurs, and they actually have been the hardest hit by the COVID response, by the lockdown, by the ability not to be able to get products in their supply chains, whether it's the bottle cap needed for your product that you're producing, a shampoo or even treacle, whatever your business was, it's been really, really hard hit through disruptions, supply chain lockdowns, because your employees are not able to make it. If you had largely women working, they've decided not to come because they have to take care of others. They have no other options with the schools closed, with the elderly parents or whoever in the house. So what the ILO has been is really trying to focus in on our attention to what micro small enterprises have been affected. But we're looking at it from both sides, and this links again to what kind of jobs there will be for youth coming out. We see a lot of potential in youth entrepreneurship, and through the creation of these micro small enterprises, that will be also the engine of economic regrowth for the country, because there's only so much large corporations or firms can do. There's, how many people can go into garment production, and you can't compete with the other countries around Sri Lanka, be it Bangladesh, India, who have also been hit by COVID. In fact, they were already doing a lot of low-skilled volume work when it came to the traditional sectors we've been operating in here, such as the garments, etc. But now you'll find even more people seeking work, and probably directed to those industries there. So the competition is going to go even higher. So idea really is for Sri Lanka to carve out its niche areas at this point in time and invest in enterprises and ideas that are innovative and unique, and not just go for the volume of work that can be found in the traditional tourism sector or the traditional hospital sector or the traditional office job or factory setup. So we've been focusing on these micro enterprises in terms of their staying afloat, but also their repurposing, how they can have access to loans and finances so that people can get jobs and create new work that makes sense in the post-COVID era. Certainly safety and health. You don't want the workplace to become the place where you get COVID and other sorts of infections, and working also on looking at what kind of skills innovation can be brought. In fact, this evening there'll be some announcement of a skills innovation competition that we have held. In fact, the Minister Dinesh Gunawardena will be announcing together with our Director General Guy Ryder this evening who the winners are. And I'm hoping some people, young people that entered this in terms of skills innovation from Sri Lanka will win something. Let's see. Together, this is with the Secretary General's Youth Envoy, Jayatma, who was also Sri Lankan national. So we'll see that. So there's a lot of scope, and we're looking and trying to find what kind of innovative skills are needed going forward with COVID. And of course, just last week, we had a massive World of Work Summit. The president of the country addressed that. And there were something like 70 heads of state from around the world that reaffirmed again and again, there's a new need to think about skills, what's needed, and especially for youth going forward, because that is really quite a concern. Okay. So now moving forward, I have just 2 more slides and then we can open up for some questions. I think for Sri Lanka, it's really important to find a way to identify who are, especially these marginalized youth. I'm suspecting, like I said, if they were working, they were the ones that were working in these small enterprises, or they were daily wage earners, own account workers. Maybe they were already in the platform economy, for example, as Uber or Trishaw drivers, whatever it might be. But how can we then look at this category? Who are these that are most prone and were already marginalized before, but are going to be doubly, triply marginalized as a result of COVID, and trying to find a way now to get them the kind of skills needed for the future that is decent and not exploitative going forward. And this really requires also thinking of new job types, things that have not even existed, there used to be a telephone operator, need for that, not very large, or a typist. And I mean, that profession is obsolete now. So it's moving so fast. So I think we have to be really ahead of the game. And this, again, innovation, entrepreneurship are key qualities that need to be harnessed, because part of identifying the potential new jobs, the kinds of types, and especially for youth, requires that type of thinking. But what there is a challenge with presently, and this is really more for the authorities, is to see how these, you might identify a new job type, and it's fine and well for ILO to say these are the bright spots, care economy, tourism, green, but how do you actually deliver that training that's relevant? Because you have set curriculums, you have set instructions, all of a sudden you need something that needs to be delivered and should be done in 3 weeks. You can't wait 6 months, 1 year to get a certificate. How can you really focus in on getting this done in a way that is rapid, of quality, etc. And then really to have the technological infrastructure in place to facilitate that. I think that's really key. That hasn't been done. It's been tried. Actually, you reverted here to going to the television, which is fine, but many other parts of the world are not necessarily relying only on television for this kind of training delivery. There are many other digital technological platforms. And so the technology infrastructure is a huge and very essential investment that the government must make hand in hand with whatever they want to deliver in terms of skilling. I think one other area is this issue of apprenticeships. I think there's a real role that the private sector can play, and was started here. There's an employers network on youth initiatives led by the Tourist Federation of Ceylon. And they were already putting in place ways in which youth could actually get on the job training through apprenticeships, hands-on training. And now you can, again, get that hands-on training without necessarily physically going into an office. So the world of work opens up also, again, if you're digitally literate and know how to embrace technology. And you can get apprenticeships that could be also online or done remotely. And similarly, I think prioritization of entrepreneurship, innovation, and using digital platforms to market, learn, reskill your products that you produce. So my last slide is maybe giving just a little bit more detail on some of these issues, repeating again and again, but the internet technological infrastructure is really essential, but even more so the issue of access for everyone. The access was not even and great before COVID. I think it's been quite a bit accelerated since COVID because, you know, whether it's even WhatsApp groups, I don't know, but you have a lot of different ways in which access has been improved, but there's a long way to go, and I think investment in that is important. It's one thing to also you know, provide the training, but the teachers also need a crash course in a way to be able to train and provide the kind of skill sets needed. And the career guidance also is essential going forward. You know, there's been the old ways in terms of providing career guidance when you're leaving school maybe, or there's a counselor that might say, oh, these are the kinds of jobs going forward, or you might register with the Department of Manpower and Employment looking for jobs. So you might get some career guidance through these public employment service. All of those need to require a rethink as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. They can still be the go-to places for advice on jobs, but the advice has to change from get a public sector job or getting a job in a factory or getting a job in a firm to really having those jobs where you are creating, innovating, and embracing technology to be able to generate employment for yourself and for others going forward. Training by firms, and I think I will end by saying that since the ILO also, we are an organization that believes that when it comes to jobs, it's not just the role of the government or educational institutions to be providing and creating those jobs. It's also very much the role of looking at the actors in the world of work, those in the private sector, employers, as well as those that are currently working in the world of work to come up with joint solutions, whether it's the training, what are the jobs of the future, etc. So that's another very important aspect to bring all of them together. With that, I'm going to end, and I think I have stuck fairly to the time I was allotted, which is about 30 minutes, and I will hand over to you, Sharada.
Thank you, Ms. Simran Singh, for these wonderful insights. Of course, all of us were able to know what sort of youth opportunities would be there after the COVID-19 pandemic, on what would possibly be the lockdown generation. So we have a very limited time for questions. I would like to take one question here. We need a comprehensive needs analysis program in labor market and identify skills gap in global post-COVID world. ILO can ILO take the initiative of this, Ms. Simran Singh?
Absolutely, that's what we're in business for. Yeah, certainly we're looking at it globally, but I think here in Sri Lanka, with the whole thinking already that preceded COVID with the future of work, I think our main call is that the labor market needs, you know, the demand side and the supply side of jobs really need to be matched much more rigorously, because there's been such a historical skills mismatch. There were already labor shortages pre-COVID in certain sectors, and that shouldn't be the case because you have such a skilled and well-educated population. So that's definitely an area of work that hand in hand working with active labor market policies going forward. So it's not just a situation where you have a pandemic and then you're giving out handouts to keep people abreast, but how you can create jobs so they can also fuel and become the engines of the economy and also live a decent life.
Great, right. And also, thank you very much, Ms. Simran. Now I would like to put up this link where everyone can go and download the recorded sessions if they really want to do that. And I think we do not have time for any more questions given the time constraints that we have. With this, I would like to thank Ms. Singh for all her valuable inputs and all the presence of all our distinguished participants for this third session. So we'll be starting our next session, which will be the last session at 3 p.m. Sri Lanka time. And if you have registered, yes, you can simply follow the instructions and log into the session. If you still haven't registered, the link is still open for you to register. So the next session will be by Professor Shyama Majumdar, the former head of UNESCO UNEVOC, to learn about skills for resilient youth. Thank you very much, Ms. Simran Singh, on behalf of all of us. And thank you all of you who are participating from your end. Stay connected, stay safe, and happy World Youth Skills Day 2020.
Indeed. Thank you so much.